Thank you, really, all for coming. I've written the column. I started the column in May of 1993, and from May of 1994, all I've heard from many readers was, "When are you going to do a book?" Well, okay, 22 years, I got it done, but I really didn't do it. My co-author is my daughter, Mary Grace, and she's not here tonight. And the reason she's not here is very simple. She's buying a house tomorrow in Madison, Wisconsin. And she kind of thought that buying a house in Madison with her husband was better than hanging out with her old man in Lincoln. I don't know. But the book came about quite simply after all these years of writing these columns. You know, you read the columns and you know it's heavy lifting. It's not light reading, and believe me, it's not light writing. And it takes a lot of work to write that column. Well, every now and then, I'm like you, I need a rest. So as Gracie would say, Dad sits down and he writes one of these easy columns. And she said, the trouble of it is you can write them in about 20 minutes. Well, that's not quite true. But I started the column when she was a little girl. And she only started reading the column about 5 years ago, when she was after college. So she liked the columns about my growing up on the farm. So one time about 3 years ago, she came. She said, "Why don't you? How many of those columns have you written?" So I have no idea. She said, "Why don't you give me a copy of all those columns? I'd like to read them all." So I went and I pulled every one of those files, and there were more than 60. That's just remarkable. I mean, so she read them all, and she called me up. She said, I said, "How do you like it?" She said, "You have a book here." I said, "Okay, go ahead and do it." And she did it. She organized them all. She edited them all. She had me write a prologue. Then she had me write a second prologue. She wasn't happy with the first one. And then she wrote an epilogue. And Gracie's one of the best editors I've ever had. You know, writers need editors. We don't have it right all the time. I mean, I still don't know how to use a colon right, and I don't know how to use a comma all the time. Just ask Gracie. I'm not a fast writer, nor am I a slow writer, but when I get done, I'm done. I don't mull it over, I'm done. So when I read it over, I don't see any errors, because I've looked at it for a day. So I sent it off to Gracie, the column, and she sees 6, 8, 10, 12 errors. And so she catches them all. It's amazing. It's amazing. And for all these years that she didn't edit the column, I must have looked like an idiot to most of my newspaper editors. There's Guebert's column. It's going to take an hour, you know. So, but the Lincoln Journal-Star has carried the column since I don't know when. I can't remember when. And Gracie not only edited the book and ramrodded it through, she asked me who could publish it. Well, I only had two names that I knew of. One was Southern Illinois University, which is near where I grew up in Southern Illinois. And I thought it was natural. I'm a Southern Illinois boy. It took him like 8 minutes to say no. So I said, well, I'm going to go on the first alternative and my last alternative, University of Illinois Press, my alma mater. I graduated the University of Illinois. You're looking at a guy who took 7 years to get a 4-year degree. I left school 3 times. Twice when I ran out of money, and once when the dean ran out of patience. And that's in the book too. And a week ago Saturday, Gracie and I were in Urbana, which is where the University of Illinois is located, at a farmer's market. The column doesn't run in Urbana, in the newspaper in Champaign-Urbana, but there are hundreds of people there, all coming up to talk about the column. And guess who walked up, shaking his 90-year-old bony finger at me? The dean, that thought it would be a good idea if I took a break. And he said, and I tell the story in the book about how I went into his office and said, I don't know if I want to be here. I was 21, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. He knew what I wanted to do. He wanted me out of there. So he threw me out. He went out. He left, came back. 2 minutes later, he smoked a pipe. And trailing smoke. He sat down and he goes, well, it's over. I said, what's over? And he says, you are. You're out of here. So what are you talking about? He said, you came in here and said you didn't know if you wanted to be here. I know 2 people who do. See you. So, but come back when you're ready to go back to school. 18 months later, I came back, and I didn't even have to ask. It was a July day. I walked to his office. He goes, yes. How do you repay that? How do you repay that? Well, you can't. You can't. But he claims now that the book is out, that he's responsible for it because he, quote, knew talent when he saw it. He knew a deadbeat when he saw him. But we were joking earlier about my name. It's pure sauerkraut, folks. There's no croissant in it. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about the cover. I indeed did have an Uncle Honey. I mean, if you read the column, you know that my great-uncle was called Uncle Honey, and he was a retired milkman who came down to the farm and suggested to my father, he didn't suggest, he said, I'm here to help. And my father was kind of nervous about that because my father remembers riding the milk route with Uncle Honey when my father was a kid, and the one thing he remembered quite clearly about my Uncle Honey and the milk route was, Honey never used a clutch shifting that milk truck. Ever. Ever, ever, ever. And every piece of machinery my father had a clutch on it. So my dad kind of knew where this was all going to go. And it went there really fast. Honey was not, first of all, how he got his name was simple. He was one of about 7 sons, 6 or 7 sons. I don't keep track of them all. He was one of the younger ones. But he was a sweet little baby. So his mother said, you're my little honey. And that's what she called him every day. Now, if somebody called you honey every day for the first 5 years, wouldn't you be a sweet little boy too? And that's what he was. He grew into a sweet little man. So his real name, I did not know until I was 13. My father and I, this is not in the book. So here's an exclusive, as we say in the newspaper business. Uncle Honey lived in town, 15 miles away, and periodically we would call him at night and say, Uncle Honey, stop by and pick up the sickles at the Oliver dealership, getting sharpened. So one night my father, we're eating dinner after milking, and my dad says, this is summertime, my dad says, call Honey, tell him to bring some sickle sections from Salger Brothers, the Oliver dealer. Okay. So I went to the phone book. I didn't know Honey's number. So I went to the phone book, and in Redbud, Illinois, my hometown, there's 100 Gueberts. So I looked in the phone book on both pages, and there wasn't a Honey Guebert. I said to my father, I said, Uncle Honey's number is not in the book. So of course it's not in the book. His name's not Honey. I said, well, what is his name? Well, it's Lorenz, L-O-R-E-N-Z. You could have knocked me over with a feather. No wonder they call him Honey. Who wanted that name? So that's the Uncle Honey of the title. And the land of milk, of course, is the big dairy farm where I grew up. When Gracie and I asked, when the University of Illinois said they would publish this book, Gracie and I, we came up with maybe a dozen titles. They were all bad. They were all bad. So the marketing director of the University of Illinois Press called us one day and said, we know this could be a touchy subject, but we'd like to talk about your titles. We have a couple of ideas. Okay, we said, what's your idea? And they said, well, the first one we kind of like, but we're not going to do it if you don't like it. Well, okay, they said, what's the land of milk and Uncle Honey? We both fell off our chair. Well, of course that's the title. Of course that's the title. And we were so stunned by the brilliance of that title that we forgot how stupid we both were and hadn't thought of that in 2.5 years. So, of course, that's the title. If you followed my column all of these many, 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 many years, you also know that I'm no fan of Farm Bureau. That's easy, right? That's easy. But I like to say I grew up in a German, well, I don't like to say it, it's a fact, German, Lutheran, Republican, Farm Bureau family. My wife's family, of course, is Irish, Catholic, Democrats, and Farmers Union. So when I took Catherine down to the farm, she didn't know, my parents had already met her and said we were going to get married. The first thing my mother said was, "Oh, Catherine, we've known mixed marriages that have worked." And I could see Catherine's literally her Irish. And then my mother, just to compound her, her compliments, says, "What will the children be?" And I cut her off at the pass and said, "Boys and girls." So, my wife is still Irish and Catholic and Democratic and Farmers Union, and I'm still German Lutheran. However, the guy on the cover here, that's a picture from our farm. That's my oldest brother, Richard, showing cattle at the county fair. Somebody asked earlier, was I in 4-H? I was in 4-H, but I hated showing cattle because you only showed cattle in 4-H on days like today. 94 degrees, hot, dusty, sweaty. Cows don't want to be there. You don't want to be there. The judge doesn't want to be there. Your parents don't want to be there. Yep. Why are you there? Yep. Well, to get a ribbon. Yep. And show off to the county that my commercial grade Holstein is better than your commercial grade Holstein. Well, that's my brother Richard, who loves cattle. And of course, he's not milking cows anymore. That's the great thing about agriculture, isn't it? If you're really good at something, you don't get to do it. But he still farms, big. But what his principal job is today is president of the Illinois Farm Bureau. And they're big. They are really big. So.
You got lots of stop signs there.
Yeah, well, people say, do you two talk? Of course we do. Well, what's your difference? What's the difference between you two? I mean, how did he go that way and you went that way? That's why I was the one who learned how to read. That's easy. If you all quote me on that, I will deny it. But a couple of quick other things. I have another deeper connection to Nebraska that I've never written about, and I could. I don't know why I haven't. My mother was born in Nebraska. My mother was born near Rising City. And there's a little German Lutheran church out in Rising City there, and that's near where she was born. And I asked, and they lost that farm in the 30s. They had auction, and they went back to Illinois with just a team of horses on the train. My grandfather would not sell the team, couldn't. They had come out in just at the very peak. We had cousins out here, and they said, "Come to the land of milk and honey." And they did, and they hit it just in the absolute worst. And so my mother's oldest brother was born and died here, 10-year-old. Then her older sister was born here. The older brother, Robert, was born here. He was about 9 or 10 when they moved back. And he, of course, was a Lutheran minister.
What was her main name?
Yeah. So, and then my mother was born here, but her youngest brother was born back in Illinois. So I asked my mother, who went back to Illinois when she was about 4, I said, "What do you remember about the farm?" Because I want to find it. And she said it had a big red barn. I said, "Well, that won't be hard to find, Mom." She said, "It was by a railroad track." "Well, that makes it better." So 2 years ago, I was out at Nebraska Farmers Union. John Hansen's the president, sitting right back there, speaking in Grand Island. And it was one of those gorgeous early December days in Nebraska where it's 0 and the sky is so blue you could, it's like the Pacific. You could paddle all day. But the wind would just cut in your half, So I had to get back to Lincoln. So I went back through Rising City. and found, I'd never been to Rising City. And of course, it was a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, you know, it was open, taverns. So I stopped at the taverns, and yeah, they kind of knew where that church was. I didn't know where it was. And so I went to that church, and there I found, you know, the cemetery. So I went back into town, and there along the elevator is, of course, a sign for the railroad that says Rising City. So I took some pictures of it, and I when I went back down to Southern Illinois for Christmas to show my mother, I said, "Mom, this is Rising City. I got to tell you, though, it's not a city and it didn't rise." She was not humored. My mother sees no humor anymore. So, but my parents are both alive. They're both from Southern Illinois. They just moved to assisted living. Neither one thinks they need it. Their testaments, as Mary Grace says, to the power of lard and nicotine. Wiry little people worked all their lives, you know. So I want to read you a story or two out of here, and then I want you to, I'm sure you all you have questions or comments, either about the column or me. I mean, you could try to give me comments, you know. I might take them graciously, but I might not. But I'm going to read you at least two columns out of here that I like, especially like. And this one's actually about 15 years old, and it's on page 81. It's called Remember Honey. And I wrote it in September, and a lot of times I don't remember why I wrote these. I don't remember what I filed Wednesday for the columns to be in your paper on Sunday, because I'm on to the next one. And so I don't remember the cause of this column. But anyway, the slightest, vaguest passing thought often ignites the mind. And in a nanosecond, it's moving at warp speed to the land of lovely lost thoughts. During a daydream recently, I pondered why my backyard pear tree is barren this year. Before my brain found the answer, an errant spark lit a dark corner of my memory to spotlight the lonely pear tree on the farm of my youth. The weathered tree, the only remnant of a long-gone farmstead, stood ready to deliver, as it did each September, a hatful of golden pears. Then, without touching the remote control, my brain replayed the video of the lovely tree's ugly demise. My Uncle Honey simply plowed it under, with a roaring 1850 Oliver and a 5-bottom IH plow. Longtime readers of this column may recall Honey and recognize, from the pear tree incident, the main ingredients of a classic Honey hit. For the uninitiative or the merely forgetful, that recipe includes one tractor at full throttle connected to either a plow, rear-mounted cultivator, silage chopper, sickle mower, or disc. A V8 1968 Pontiac Catalina all by itself will work well too. Any field or road near a telephone pole, barn, fence, tree, or river, add Honey and wait. Usually only minutes for the sound of a splash, a crashing tree, crushing metal, snapping wood, or any combination thereof. For all the noise and mayhem he created, Honey, as his childhood nickname implied, was pathologically pleasant. He loved the St. Louis Cardinals, his daily 7-ounce Budweiser, and silence. He was pleasantly pathological also, imperturbable. Honey quietly took everything life brought him, his milk delivery trucks before retirement, my father's farm machinery after retirement, and methodically wrecked it. It was one of our family's deepest mysteries. On his feet, Honey was quiet, kind, and generous. On a tractor seat, he murdered everything animate and inanimate. If Honey was astride or beside farm machinery, mayhem was but a moment away. He lacked only two things for complete happiness: safety and enough shear bolts. I once witnessed Honey inadvertently plow a deep furrow with a pull-type silage chopper. Later, I saw him accidentally chop silage with a semi-mounted plow. He regularly mowed down fences with discs, sickle mowers, and cars, but I never actually saw him mow one fence row. Cattle feared him, dogs loved him. The only cross words my father ever came close to speaking to his quiet uncle was the time Honey asked for a chainsaw. He carried a pocket full of unshelled peanuts everywhere. My father, trailing in Honey's twisted metal wake, carried aspirin. His pocket also held a 2-inch bolt, the perfect length to prop open the handle of the diesel fuel hose. That meant the barnyard periodically flooded with diesel.
Really?
Honey believed a man wasn't a man if he didn't carry matches. Smoke became our way of finding him on the farm. If it was white and gone in 5 minutes, we were relieved because we knew he hadn't wrecked anything. Yet. Matches and 5 gallons of diesel were Honey's groundhog eradication program. The two also served as his Johnson grass and tree stump removal programs. Since Johnson grass, tree stumps, and groundhogs were the farm's principal crops for years, Honey never went to the field without his trusty pyrotechnic twins. Rural fire districts, they were invented because of Honey. As were safety glasses, safety glass, safety shields, life jackets, jaws of life, EMTs, SUVs, ABS, hard hats, and steel-toed boots. The national seatbelt law wasn't because of Ralph Nader, it was because of Honey. Tractor roll cages, Honey must have had a hand in that too. And now, as the yellows of September once again checker the fields of autumn, I see Honey killing our pear tree again. We love that tree, and we loved our kind killer Honey. Loved him to death. We just kept our distance when he was operating farm machinery because we didn't want to die with him. That was Honey in a nutshell. He always did have a pocket full of shearbolts, though. You think about that. What kind of man carries shearbolts? And you quickly come up with the answer, a dangerous man. There's several columns in here about my Uncle Honey. I've written, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. I don't keep track of them, but they're in here. And they all have a certain aspect. They highlight a certain aspect of Honey's personality. So I won't read any more of them, but if you want to know more about him, you're more than free to ask me. I want to read you now a different kind of column, and it's probably one of the more harder hitting columns in the book. People often ask me, do you believe what you write? And I say, well, of course I believe it. And they say, well, no, you're just writing that stuff to sell newspapers. And I say, you know anything about newspaper business? How's that working out? You know, newspapers are in terrible shape, so I'm not selling a whole lot of newspapers. No, I write what I write because I want to write about it. And what I write, I believe. And I believe this column when I wrote it, and I believe this column yet today. And afterwards, I'll tell you, I do remember the background of why I wrote this one. And it took me a while to remember because I think I didn't want to, but come on up front. Lutherans are up front. Methodists. They finally made it up front? You know, Lutherans at Judgment Day. Methodists. Catholics. No, for years, my children are Catholic, and it doesn't make me any difference because you know why? I don't know. My parents say, "Well, aren't you disappointed in your kids?" I said, "Well, geez, are you disappointed in me? How can a parent be disappointed in their child?" And then they say, "Well, they're not children anymore. They're 30 and 35." Okay, you got a point there. Now I remember when I wrote this one. Golly, this was written 20 years ago today, July the 30th, 1995. That's kind of spooky. And I titled this, "People Are as Important as the Land." When you see the title on my column, unfortunately, the newspaper editors around the country change it. And on the bigger newspapers, they wouldn't dare touch it. But all the other papers, they feel free. Oh, we got to fit it in here, you know. We like this, you know. We're more clever than Alan. I'm sure they are, but you don't change. You don't have the right to change my copy. Mark Twain, before he was a writer, was a typesetter. Did you know that? And Mark Twain spent several fortunes trying to figure out better ways to set type. And in newspapers, it's a big deal. You used to have to hand set it, you know. Pick an A reversed, you know, and put it, and pick a B, and you know, and then lock it all in. The rule then was you follow the copy out the window, and what that meant is you don't change a letter. That's what I wrote. That's what I meant. And if you change it, and you change the meaning of it, I'm coming after you next week. But titles, they change all the time. Drives me crazy. Drives me nuts. Because it's not like I don't work on the title. So this is titled, People Are as Important as the Land. The 720-acre, 100-cow Southern Illinois dairy farm of my youth is long gone. Its 12-foot discs, 80-horsepower gasoline tractors, and excruciatingly slow 6-cow bypass parlor. Anybody know that? Went the way of most things from that era. The smallish iron and its gluttonous appetite for manpower were both easily replaced with bigger iron. The switch to a power-shifting, front-folding, air-conditioned, globally positioned, computerized agriculture even eventually displaced every employee on that farm. And the man who ordered all the replacing, my father, eventually replaced himself. He's now a landlord who cashes steady rent checks instead of a dairy farmer who cashes steadily shrinking milk checks. Two neighboring brothers, with their huge equipment, cellular telephones, this is before they were cell, and zero hired labor, now farm the entire spread every year with less muscle and in fewer hours than it took us to put up a single cutting of hay. I do not miss the sweat, the 90-hour weeks of the cows. And I do not begrudge the tenants' ability to do in a month the work that typically took us a year. I do, however, miss the people. 30 years ago, our farm was nearly a self-contained village. 3 full-time hired men and their families lived on the farm year-round. During the summer, when cultivating, haymaking, and straw baling demanded even more brawn, 3 part-timers were also hired. All earned about $75 a week. But the full-timers had side benefits: a house, utilities, no telephone, of course, and all the milk they and their families could possibly consume. The meat, sausage, and lard from a 2-day, 10-hog butchering every February were divided evenly among them and my family. All shared 2 fat, open heifers each year, too. In return for the money, the milk, and the meat, these workmen, with workman-like names of Howard, Jackie, Charlie, Bobby, Bill, Bobby, and Monroe, worked from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 days a week, 51 weeks each year. And during their 1-week vacation, most stayed on the farm. The reason they stayed, my brothers and I suspected, was that they got more vacation pleasure in endlessly driving past hay fields where we were melting than if they had gone fishing for the week. While the farm received the benefits of their labor, my brothers and I got something different from these men. They were a rough, educated crew who possessed an incredible ability to work, swear, smoke, and drink. Every day, to my mother's often voiced contempt, these worldly men taught her boys some of life's naughtier pleasures. At the same time, however, they quietly taught us how to work. And if we failed to follow their hard lead, they mercilessly shamed us back into line by working even harder. We learned more about life, work, and the pure dignity of labor from them than from anyone else. And how my brothers and I repaid them for these important lessons is one of the farm's and agriculture's greatest ironies. As we got older, smarter, and stronger, we replaced them. The choice between them and us was so simple that it wasn't really even a choice at all. We could do things that they just couldn't, and in truth weren't trusted to do. Run the combine, plant corn, dry the swather, take charge of the dairy. Later, when we slipped into college, our muscles were replaced by brown balers, more silos, bigger combine, 180 horsepower tractors, and a new efficient milking parlor. Well, that farm was as important as the land. Today, nothing seems as important as the land. And I still feel that way. I still feel that way. There's another column in there about how I drive from my hometown, which was actually 15 miles from where the farm was, down to the farm one day. And everything's missing on the whole drive. It's all gone. And I say, for one of the farms, that the barns are gone, the corn's gone, the bins are gone, the silos are gone, the barn's gone, the cats are even gone. I mean, that's how thorough we have been in our modernizing our farms. And notice I didn't say food. I have this quaint notion that if you farm, you ought to be growing food. We used to. That's why the column's called the Farm and Food File. Back in '93, I thought that. But farming should be about food. It shouldn't be about land, and it shouldn't be about efficiency, and it shouldn't be about profitability. It has to be all those things. I get it. I understand. I grew up on a farm. But it can be about the people, too. And the background of that column was I finally figured it out. I was angry, as you might be able to tell as I wrote that. Because I looked in the local statewide ag paper that week, the Illinois Agri-News, and I noticed a lot of farm ground for sale. This is 1995. In the middle of the summer, like, what's all the farm ground selling for? So I started adding up the different ads that I saw selling farm ground. And I came across one ad, it was a display ad about 3 by 5, and it said 720 acre Southern Illinois farm. Wonder where that is. Our farm was always called the Indian farm because the Kaskaskia Indians had their village there for hundreds of years. So I saw this ad, it said 720 acre Southern Illinois farm. It had a St. Louis real estate company and a St. Louis telephone number. So I called it. The guy answered. Said, hey, I saw that ad in the Agri-News. He said, is this farm down in Randolph County? Yeah, the guy said, it's in Randolph County. Huh. I said, is it on Lock and Dam Road? I said, yes, it is. It's on Lock and Dam Road. I said, is this the Indian farm? And he says, is this Allen? So you're damn right it's Allen. He said, your father said you'd be calling. So I called my father, and I said, Dad, you're selling the farm? He said, yes, I am. I said, well, Dad, you got 5 sons. And then as cool as cucumber, he said, the German Lutheran thing. Yeah, and the last time I looked, not one of their names was on the deed. And the farm was sold. Because it was more important than the people that grew up on that farm. And that's not a statement of sadness or tragedy. That's a statement of fact. It's a fact that has to be that way. And the way we've moved this beautiful, glorious part of our culture. You know, we talk about farming and food, but of course it's all part of agriculture. But why do we emphasize just agri and never the culture? Why don't we ever talk about the culture anymore? And I think it's particularly fitting we're in this building because, of course, this building was the Beatrice Creamery. You know? And look what happened to Beatrice. It kind of grew up too, didn't it? I mean, I don't begrudge it. I wish we'd have saved part of it. But the more I think about it, the more I read these, we might have been wrong on the subtitle. This might not be memories from the farm of my youth. It might be a blueprint of how it's going to be again. Because I really do believe that this will all come back. It'll come back sooner or later. You know why? Always does. Always does. Think of the change you've lived through in agriculture. I ask this question a lot, but I suspect some people in this room know the answer. 100 years ago, what was the number one crop in the United States?
Wheat.
Oats. Oats. Oats.
Oats.
Now we import oats. If you ask somebody, what you do with the oat wagon, they'd call some public official to have you, examined. 100 years ago, when you talked about 1 horsepower, you talked about 1 horse, So, think about 50 years ago, anhydrous ammonia. About 75 years ago, hybrid seed corn. 25 years ago, GMOs. So you telling me agriculture doesn't change? Agriculture does nothing but change. The way my brother farms today isn't the way my father farmed. And the way my father farmed isn't the way his uncle farmed. And the way his uncle farmed isn't the way his father farmed. It's entirely different. 50 years from now, you know what it's going to be? I don't either, but it'll be different. It might be entirely different. And you know why it'll be different? Because the people 50 years from now won't be burdened with all this knowledge that we have today. They're going to do things their own way. They're going to do things differently. I like to say it this way. There's an old Lakota medicine man, Black Elk, who wisely once said that remember everything you have seen, because everything forgotten returns on the circling winds. Now, 100 years from now, if I came back from up there, or looked down, I don't know if they're going to be driving IHCs, or M's, or Oliver 66s. But I'll bet they will not be driving what they're driving today. We've all but taken all the people out of agriculture. That's not sustainable. That will not work. So, if 50 years from now, somebody comes across this book in the dusty corner of a used bookstore or on the recycle pile of some library, I hope they grab it and they go, what's so different about this? This guy's selling this book. Come on, you're kidding me. We're doing this today. That's my prayer. So, if you have any questions about the column, about me, yeah, I'll be happy to answer all in any.
I just want to agree with you. I raise Belgian horses, so I deal with the Amish quite a bit.
Yeah.
And Illinois, I'm fairly familiar with they're going back. Most Amish farms aren't over 20 acres anymore because they're having produce auctions where they all come together. And they said, we can make more money on 20 acres of produce than we can 160 acres of conventional farming, corn and soybeans and whatnot. So I do think that's, but one question I do have you ask you, and then I'll shut up. But do you think, my fear is, I was the hired man of your book, the part-time, had a Bohemian family, grew up next to it. I'm just afraid that we're going to drive across Illinois someday and say, no trespassing, this county's owned by Syngenta. Do you?
Oh, you think big ag is going to be corporate ag?
That's my fear.
Oh, I don't. Well, I could answer that I could answer it either way. But here, I'll tell you what I'm working on for next week, which will give you an idea of an answer to that. I always joked that they're never going to verticalize cattle production, because no packer I know, packer buyer I know, wants to pull calves in a snowstorm at 3 a.m. in February in South Dakota. No, not going to do that, right? But they're going to have you do it, and here's how. And you're going to do it. Cattle people will do it. Right now, there's an effort underway called the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef Production. Now think about that for a minute. Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Golly, I wonder what's in that. And what is sustainable? Well, if you look into it, you look into that word, just that word, you come up with about 50 definitions of sustainable because every farm group tries to define it. And of course they try to define it in their most favorable light to them. So the Beef Boys have an idea of how sustainable should be defined in order for them to build a global, yardstick for sustainability in beef. It's not what you would build. And here's why. Guess who's in the round table? It's a big table. It's global, right? The biggest beef packer in the world, JBS, is at that table. They're driving the process. Cargill's at that table, ADM's at the table, Syngenta's at the table, Farm Bureau's at the table, all the biggest of the Bigfoots. They're all there. And why? Well, their working definition has that they want economic viability and uniformity and everybody sharing everybody's information. Well, wait a minute, if everybody shares their information, don't you just have one producer? Exactly. And you're working for the man. So, yeah, I fear that. I fear exactly what you're saying. But, I hope the good people out here fear it too. So I think time for somebody to shine a light on it. I'm going to shine a light on it next week.
On the flip side, I've been volunteering the last 4 years, working with the 150 FFA chapters in Nebraska. More children in metro areas across the nation are learning about agriculture in a different sense than we understand it. Horticulture, floriculture, landscaping, land use, land management, natural resources. And yet there is so much interest I found among Nebraska's FFA chapters and 13,000 students that they're interested in those aspects of agriculture that once upon a time was part of their history. And you can't even find enough FFA teachers now across the nation.
Most of the universities, the land-grant universities, have ended their ag education programs.
Right.
Because there's not a lot of rural schools anymore. Right. And that's a big problem. They've consolidated the rural schools, consolidated the program. So you used to have 5 rural schools, 5 FFA programs, you have 1. On that note, I'm more hopeful about FFA than I've ever been in the last 15 years. And there's a couple of reasons for that. They're not Future Farmers of America anymore. They don't call themselves that. Corporately, they're called FFA. Because they're not going to be future farmers. They're going to be FFA. They're going to be agribusiness people. That should worry us. They get about $30 million a year from corporate ag, too. That's what really runs FFA. They claim 600,000 members nationwide. Probably a fair number. But what gives me hope is exactly what you say. The top 5 state officers in Illinois, I don't think my brother read the paper that week. The top 5 incoming FFA officers that week, only one came from a traditional farm background. The president, the young kid who was president of Illinois FFA, or could have been vice president, raised rabbits. I always thought they were dumb bunnies and everything, There are other questions. Don't be shy. Please.
Can we feed everybody without big ag?
Absolutely.
That's a topic that I can never get a straight answer.
Well, you're not going to get a straight answer from Big Ag about it. But here, let me throw out some statistics that I think are just overwhelmingly shocking. I mean, we never talk about these things. 70% of the world's farmers are women. 400 million women in India alone. And I'll get back to that in a minute. If I don't, remind me. We grow enough food now for everyone in the world to have a daily diet of 1,800 calories. More than adequate. But not for us. Of course, we Americans, on average, and I'm not average if I go to that pub, eat 2,600 calories a day. And yet, we throw away 30% of the food we grow. So do we have enough food in the world right now? Absolutely. So I think we didn't throw it away. Back to India for a brief second. When I was in India, I came across a staggering statistic. The Indians throw away more fruit and vegetables than that is raised in all of Australia every year. For 2 simple reasons. No roads and no refrigeration. I think we can solve those problems. That's not big problems. We produce it. We don't get it to where it's supposed to be. A couple other statistics. There are 7.3 billion people in the world today, and 800 million go hungry each and every night, globally. 20 years ago, when there's 6 billion people in the world, 1 billion people went hungry every night. So we've added 1 billion people to the world's population, and we've reduced global hunger at the same time. That's remarkable. But even more remarkable is we've done it when we throw 30 to 40% of the food away each and every day. Are hungry people are there hungry people in Lincoln?
Yeah, lots.
Lots. Are there grocery stores in Lincoln? Are the grocery stores full in Lincoln? Then why are there hungry people in Lincoln? Hunger is not a function of production, folks. Hunger is a function of poverty. People go hungry because they don't have the money to buy food. Why can't we get that through our thick skulls? We grow enough food. What we don't grow enough is people who have money. Or the economic systems in many countries are just unfair. Back to India. You know, India is fighting very hard, very strongly, very long, and very unsuccessfully against GMOs. And everybody thinks it's because the Indians are anti-GMOs or anti-technology. They're not. They're not. People don't understand the culture of agriculture in India. And the culture is 400 million women earn a living in India picking weeds. That's what they do. They get a couple rupees a day by cleaning weeds out of crops. Bring in GMOs, blow on the Roundup, 400 million people are unemployed tomorrow. Worse, the women of those families are the key breadwinners. They're the only cash that comes into that family because their husbands are doing what? Trying to farm. Poverty level farms. So now you've affected the whole family. 700 million Indians. That's the way it works out. On top of that, India is a country that doesn't have a lot of modern medicine, but has a lot of old, we'd call it homeopathic. Built on what? The plants of India. So let's blow on some more Roundup and kill that too. It's not that they're anti-Monsanto or anti-Roundup. They're pro-India. They like what they got. It works. And you say it doesn't work very well. It works well enough for them. And if we want to be the ugly American and go in there and Bigfoot it, I guess we can. But we've evidently not learned anything, generations upon generations. So it's a great example. India is a fabulous example to hold up and say, we have enough food. You know what India does with their food? They export it. They got so much. And then we complain. They're exporting wheat into the global market. They shouldn't be exporting wheat. They got hungry people in India. We could just, forget about what everybody else is doing and concentrate on what we're doing sometimes. Maybe that was more than you wanted to know, but I want everybody to know those are simple things, just simple things that we can do.
I always wondered what your thought was. You're talking about Roundup. I've got several friends that grew up that are still farmers in Lancaster County. Roundup's not handling a lot of weeds anymore. They're having to spike it with Cobra, I think they call it. It's $400 a gallon to get it to work. So where are we heading? Where are we going down that road?
I remember when Roundup was brand new. It was in the probably early 70s, mid 70s. It was during that hiatus where the dean thought I should go back home and learn how to do something else. And we had Johnson grass. You don't have Johnson grass up here. It's a southern rhizome perennial. The hired man used to call it, they didn't call it rhizomes. You know what rhizomes are? They branch out underground and the plant pops up 8 feet away. They call it rhinestones. That darn plant's got rhinestones on it. And they would try to dig it out. And you go, you could bury a tractor there, guys. You're not going to dig out. So my Uncle Honey would treat it with with diesel fuel. He had a special mixture for Johnson grass. Half diesel, half gas. He never left the farm without a 5-gallon can of that mixture on his tractor every day. And he never returned to the home at night without that can being empty. When you find Johnson grass, you just spread it all around. And of course, it sterilized the ground for, well, hell, I think there's still 40 acres done in a growing. So Roundup came along and we sprayed that on Johnson grass, and guess what? Miracle drug. Miracle cure. $70 a gallon back then. My father said, I'll spray this, boys. You don't touch it. So about its effectiveness and that whole technology, that whole line of technology, that again is proof of our hubris. I have a genetics friend in University of Michigan that says it this way. He said, I work in my lab 60 hours a week, but Mother Nature works 24/7, 365 to beat me, to defeat me, to get around me. And she always wins. Never loses. Bet on Mother Nature. It's a rock solid 100% lead pipe cinch. So here we have Mother Nature now coming back around saying, so now we have to come up with something hotter. Well, isn't that a right way to do it? Why don't we go back to what worked? We will. When we flail and flounder through everything else, we'll go back to what works. I always thought it was kind of interesting that when Roundup soybeans came in, and all of a sudden you had these beautiful fields of soybeans. My father hated raising soybeans. His fields looked like it. I mean, we didn't know if he was growing giant foxtail or volunteer corn. Yeah. Oh man, horseweeds. You had horseweeds down there as big as that. You know? And you'd have to combine around it because you combine with your sickle bar. They wouldn't fit in the sickle bar. They were big. So why don't they grow something they want to grow? That's easier. I always ask my father, why do you grow soybeans? Well, I have to. Oh, somebody's telling you to? Who tells you to grow soybeans? Why don't you grow something you like? They walk away. He said, you need to go to the university. Get out of here. And the university says, you need to go back to your dad. Go back. We'll figure it out long after somebody will figure it out long after we're gone. But when Roundup started coming in, everybody said, boy, this is just great. Everybody looked like an Illinois farmer, you know, beautiful bean fields, gorgeous bean fields. And I said, well, and then they'd all complain because beans were down to $6. So wait a minute. You know, if I don't work as hard as I used to, I don't get paid the same. You guys don't even cultivate and you want to get paid more? How's that work? And they'd all look at me like, yeah. Well, Catherine and I wouldn't get invited to dinner then. I think that technology is dangerous from this standpoint.
Yes.
I can give, and we see this, I can give this glass to some illiterate farmer or hired man in Argentina and say, put 2 of these in that big sprayer and go out and spray. And therefore, you know, I replace the art, I replace the science, I replace everything in agriculture with just that. And now we have GPS and everything else. So what's the bottom line here? What's the logical bottom line to all of this? There won't be any farmers. There won't be any farmers. Why would you need farmers? I have farmer friends, I say to them now with their GPS-driven combine, so what are you doing in the combine all day? I mean, you must be bored to death. Oh, he says, I download movies and watch them on the iPad.
Read magazines.
Yeah. Well, no, farmers ain't reading magazines. I know that. So that. Any other questions about the column? Or go ahead.
I was going to comment. The best advice we had in the early 70s from our bank was farm-to-farm program.
Well, yeah, and that's a whole nother
That's what's
topic.
happened to the whole thing in agriculture, don't you think?
I had a glass of iced tea with a certain business editor here in town who shall remain nameless. But that's exactly what he said.
Right or wrong?
Well, right or wrong, you know, farmers designed the farm programs, so that's why they don't complain too much about it. I wrote years ago, long before any of you were even reading the column, I rode around a day in the congressional district with the congressman from that district, Central Illinois, named Ed Madigan. Now, some of you Aggies may remember Ed because he was Secretary of Agriculture for about 10 minutes at the end of the first George H.W. Bush administration. And Ed Madigan was also chairman, subcommittee chairman, or he was ranking member on the House Ag Committee General Commodities Subcommittee, which made him minority. He was a Republican. No, at that time they were majority. He was the chairman of that committee. So he had a lot to say about the Farm Bill. What's going to be in the Farm Bill? So I rode around a day with him in his district. Ed Madigan was a wonderful guy to ride around. Him and his wife Evelyn. He never went anywhere without Evelyn, and I don't know why, because she never said anything. But they had this big conversion van, and they had these captain's chairs, and he'd be reading the paper. He smoked Marlboro Lights. I said, Congressman, where are we going? I don't know. Ask the driver. So we'd go to some parade, and every junkyard we'd go by, we stopped because Ed liked old cars. So one time where I'm riding around with him, I said, Congressman, how do you ride a Farm Bill? Oh, he said, that's easy. So first of all, there are more people who work for the United States Postal Service in my district than farm. We're talking about flat black Central Illinois. Well, that was, that's quotable. Write that down. And then he said, the farm groups come to me, and I say, what do you want in the Farm Bill? And they say, well, we want this, we want this, we want that. I said, write it down. And so they all write it down. And then I look at it, and I hand it to my staff, and I say, that makes sense to you? Yeah, and they work on it a little bit. And then I call the farm group people back in and say, here's your Farm Bill. And they say, well, we got one. And then I say, go out and give me the votes. And they do. They go out and give me 219 votes, and it's a Farm Bill. And I said, is it that easy? He goes, yeah, pretty much. And of course, that used to be that easy. Now it's not, because the old urban farm coalition's broken apart. $100 billion a year spent each and every year by USDA. 80 billion, a little over 80 billion is food assistance programs. 20 billion is crop insurance, soil and water conservation, university land grant systems, animal plant health inspection services, food safety, the things you think that USDA does. But $4 out of every 5 go to food assistance. And why? That's the way it was designed back in 1960. Who knew more about food? The food assistance back then was designed as a program to help poor people. And who knew, and get rid of the American agricultural surplus. Who knew more about surplus than the farmers who were producing it? So it got put in the USDA. That's where it is. Last Farm Bill was supposed to be 2012 Farm Bill. Didn't get done. 2013 Farm Bill. Didn't get done. Got done in 2014. Why? Because that old coalition broke apart. But it wasn't just that coalition that broke apart. It was more specific. What broke apart was the Republican Party. Just like they're doing right now again. I mean, if you're reading anything about what Ted Cruz is, he's kind of having a problem in the Senate now. Nobody will talk to him. I mean, he's finally made a mess of things well enough that everybody's got the message, even his own people. The same thing happened day before yesterday in the House, didn't they? Remember, let's force a resolution to get rid of the Speaker. Wow. I thought my family was a little bit bad. But the Republicans can't figure out how they're going to operate their own home. That's what happened in the Farm Bill. The 70 or so Tea Party members said to their leader, we're not voting for this Farm Bill. We're not voting for all that food assistance. Ain't doing it. No, never. Now, if the Speaker had brought the bill to the floor, they'd had more than enough votes to pass it, Republican and Democratic votes, combined, easily. But he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't do it. Prior to the 2014 Farm Bill, you know how many farm bills John Boehner's voted in favor of? None. Why? Because he hates farm programs. You can't reason with people who hate. So that was the story. That breakdown kept the Farm Bill from being done for 2.5 years. I believe the next Farm Bill when it's ready, when this one matures, either this one will be extended, just like they did the transportation bill again. You know, cowards. You don't do your job, you get in trouble. These people don't do their jobs, they get reelected. I mean, the people who really don't want to do this aren't doing anything. I mean, you get yourself, let me see if I understand it. You get yourself elected to do a job, you get yourself elected to the government to dismantle the government. Is that what you're saying? How's that work? So I believe the next farm bill will be a food bill. There won't be enough farmers to defend it.
Something the non-farmer people population will understand, though.
Well, people understand food.
Yeah.
And I think the opportunity is ripe. Really, really, really ready. People are ready for it. I mean, and I also think, and I have not written a column about this because I haven't really thought about it too much, but you know what we're doing in this country as far as our income stratification. We're doing the same thing with food. If you're poor in this country, what do you eat? Abominable stuff. And you get what? Worse. If you have more money, guess what? You get great food. How'd that happen? How did we do that? You know, those gaps, those things these are public policy questions. This is why I write about public policy. This is why half the people in Lincoln hate me.
More than that, probably.
I really feel good now.